This is Las Vegas, a famous entertainment city in the USA. However, while people party and have fun, a tragedy is unfolding to the east of the city at Lake Mead, highlighted on the map. As shown by maps taken decades ago, the lake is shrinking at an alarming rate. However, the shrinking is not as much of a problem as what the dried-up lake is revealing. Why is Lake Mead drying up? What is the disappearing water revealing? And can Lake Mead be saved? Join us as we bring you how Lake Mead is drying up and revealing a terrifying secret. Las Vegas is known for its bright neon lights, which attract lots of fun seekers. However, what many revelers do not know is that the water supply of Sin City comes from Lake Mead, which is in serious trouble. While multiple states depend on Lake Mead for water supply, the lake, surprisingly, is not a natural one. The area was actually inhabited by Native American cultures as early as 10,000 years ago. The Colorado River flowed freely in a wetter, cooler environment back then. However, when the iconic Hoover Dam was built, it required that the Colorado River be slowed and rerouted in order to provide a water supply to the developing region. This process filled the surrounding area with water, resulting in Lake Mead. Lake Mead is huge. Lake Mead Recreational Area includes not only the lake itself, but also Lake Mojave, Las Vegas Bay, and surrounding lands. The entire area encompasses 1.5 million acres. Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States by volume and second only to Lake Powell in surface area when fully stocked. Lake Mead has enough capacity to hold the Colorado River's average annual flow for 2 years. Lake Mead stretches 65 miles from Hoover Dam to Pierce Ferry when full. It has a maximum width of 9.3 miles and a 550-mile-long, highly irregular shoreline. Lake Mead is comprised of 4 large, deep but linked basins that cover deep canyons and their steep walls along the historic Colorado River channel. These basins are Gregg, Temple, Virgin, and Boulder. The 4 basins are ecologically distinct because the waters within them retain the characteristics of their sources. Other notable features of the lake include 4 narrow canyons, Iceberg, Virgin, Boulder, and Black, as well as the 32.9-mile-long Overton Arm, which extends south from the Virgin and Muddy Rivers to the Virgin Basin. Furthermore, Lake Mead, like Hoover Dam, spans state lines. Riding on a boat, you can cross the border between Nevada and Arizona several times. Lake Mead National Recreational Area receives approximately 8 million recreational visits per year, with approximately half of all visitors coming from Southern California. The remainder of the visitors are from Nevada, Arizona, Utah, and other western states. Lake Mead is more than just a park and recreation area, though. It was built to provide water for the influx of residents and visitors to Las Vegas and the surrounding areas, as well as a means of irrigation. But where does Lake Mead get all its water from? The Colorado River and 3 smaller tributaries, the Virgin and Muddy Rivers, as well as the Las Vegas Wash, empty into Lake Mead. The Colorado River, which now enters Lake Mead at the northern end of the Gregg Basin, nearly 60 miles upstream of Hoover Dam, feeds the Gregg and Temple basins. Under current conditions, the Virgin and Muddy Rivers flow into the Overton Arm and then travel 25 miles to merge with the Colorado River water in the Virgin Basin. The upper end of the lake's combined flows enters the east end of Boulder Basin at the Narrows. At the west end of Boulder Basin, Las Vegas Wash empties into Las Vegas Bay. However, snowmelt that drains into the Colorado River accounts for 96% of the water flowing into Lake Mead. Early spring melt causes a surge of water through the river and into Lake Powell. Lake Powell discharges water flows through the Grand Canyon and into Lake Mead. The lake level is usually at its highest in early spring and at its lowest in mid to late summer, when irrigation needs have increased and drawn down the water levels. Lake Mead is a critical water resource for multiple states in the US, making its health a matter of national priority. Hoover Dam and Lake Mead are both important parts of the complex system that divides and distributes the Colorado River. The river runs 1,400 miles from Colorado's Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California, providing water to approximately 40 million people in the United States and Mexico. It provides water to dozens of indigenous tribes and 11 national parks, as well as irrigating 5.5 million acres of farmland. A few hundred miles upstream, the Glen Canyon Dam created Lake Powell, which, along with Lake Mead, collects and stores a significant portion of the water that sustains the Colorado River system. According to a report by the energy watchdog group NERC, a loss of power from Glen Canyon Dam during a season when energy consumption typically increases, such as the summer, could destabilize the surrounding power grid. The Southern Nevada Water Authority regulates Lake Mead's releases, which provide 90% of the water in southern Nevada. The Water Authority declares a drought watch when lake water levels begin to fall and are expected to fall below 1,145 feet. When the water level falls below 1,145 feet, the watch is upgraded to a drought alert. A drought emergency is declared if the lake level falls below 1,125 feet. Each of these water level alert states cause a variety of water restrictions and practices in the area, ranging from restrictions on water in gardens, washing cars, and running fountains in civic parks and public places, to increases in water rates to encourage conservation. But despite the strict level of monitoring, Lake Mead is drying up. The lake actually has a history of drought. Lake Mead has experienced 3 major droughts since the completion of Hoover Dam in the 1930s. The lake's surface elevation dropped to nearly 1,100 feet in 1955 but recovered to normal levels within a year. The level fell below 1,100 feet in 1964 and took a decade to recover. However, Lake Mead fell to its lowest elevation since 1937 when the reservoir was filled for the first time in July after years of steady decline. The number recorded at Hoover Dam, 1,043 feet above sea level, was dangerously close to the 1,000-foot threshold required to operate its hydropower turbines. Lake Powell's water elevation, which feeds hydropower turbines at Glen Canyon Dam, was 26% of its total capacity, while the Colorado River's capacity was only 10% higher. According to Greg Postal, a meteorologist with the Weather Channel, the problem is that less water is flowing through the Colorado River system due to a persistent upper weather pattern that hangs over the west. Certain areas beneath the weather pattern, such as parts of California and Nevada, do not receive consistent rain. And climate scientists say the upper-level pattern will become more common in a warming world as a result of climate change. Seasonal fluctuations such as unusually heavy rains can still occur while the overall pattern persists, so basically we are drifting toward drier times. Extended periods of low precipitation result in less water collecting in Lakes Mead and Powell, as well as less snowpack in the Rocky Mountains to melt and push the river downstream during warmer months. Apart from this, because too much water was allocated when the Colorado River Compact established state distributions a century ago, less water has always flowed through the system than the agreement originally suggested. Initially, states were permitted to take a set amount of water from the river each year. To be fair, this amount allowed states to build and expand over the course of a century. However, the amount was based on what scientists later discovered to be an incorrect estimate of the river's flow, and development outpaced the available water to support what was there. America is about to pay for the short-sightedness, and speaking about paying for the error, the effects of Lake Mead drying up is being felt already. In 2021, the U.S. Department of Interior was forced to declare a water shortage in the lower basin, requiring cuts for the first time under emergency guidelines developed in response to the drought in 2007. The Tier 1 shortage cuts primarily affected Arizona and Nevada, which will face significant reductions in water allocations when Tier 2 shortage requirements take effect in 2023. The Interior Department announced more cuts earlier in response to critically low reservoir conditions at both Lakes Mead and Powell. To cope with the water loss, Arizona was given 21% less water than it would normally receive for next year, while Nevada and Mexico will lose 8% and 7% respectively. The drought has already resulted in practical changes as states take serious steps to conserve resources. With over $12 billion from President Joe Biden's infrastructure law and the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act earmarked to improve Western water and power infrastructure and address drought-related challenges. In southern Nevada, water cops now patrol neighborhoods looking for waste violations. Residents are now banned from tending decorative grass. In Arizona, the majority of the savings are derived from a canal that serves 80% of the state's population and without which the central agricultural sector, as well as cities like Phoenix and Tucson, could not have grown to their current sizes. California, however, managed to escape federal budget cuts in both years. The Colorado River provides between a quarter and a third of the total water supply to the state's southern region, with the state receiving the largest annual allocation. Water is diverted from the river and routed through two massive canals that feed into Southern California and provide irrigation and hydroelectric power to the region's 600,000 acres of farmland. But that does not mean California has no water problems, because even without federal aid, California's agricultural sector is facing massive losses due to a lack of water. As Northern California runoff decreased, state irrigation districts have been sending less water to southern counties. With falling allocations, some farmers are now experimenting with conservation practices, and many are deciding to reduce their acreage and produce fewer crops instead. And while states wrangle between themselves on who should cut more of its water consumption, Lake Mead's receding waters have uncovered grisly secrets that some people prefer to be buried forever. Skeletons of bodies disposed of in the lake have now been resurfacing. These findings have kept the police busy, as they are most likely connected to mob killings from decades ago. Lynette and Lindsay Melvin went paddleboarding on Lake Mead expecting a quiet day. As they relaxed on the water of the massive lake, the sisters from Henderson, Nevada, hoped to see some natural beauty. But could their day have ended on a more sensational note? The pair was looking for a beaver dam which they had seen before, but what they discovered was far more macabre. The skeletal remains of a man who had gone missing for decades and was presumed drowned. They spotted a bone and decided to dig further. It didn't take them long to realize they were looking at human remains. They found a skull confirming the origin of their find. The sisters had uncovered the remains of Thomas Earned, who had drowned in the lake while vacationing with his family on August 2, 2002. The discovery reopened old wounds for the Ernsts, but it also provided much-needed closure. Lake Mead has long been suspected of being a location where the mob dumped the bodies of murder victims. David Kohlmeyer, a former Henderson police officer who now hosts a local podcast, summed it up this way: "People go to Lake Mead and then disappear. Many people have vanished there over the years. Police might find their car, but not the person if they're involved in criminal activity or suicidal thoughts." While the remains found by the two sisters did not appear to have been connected to any crime, other grisly human remains found have had clear markings of mob killings. On this occasion, the bones were found inside a metal barrel by people enjoying a stroll along the lake shore on the weekend. Police believe that the victim was shot and that the killing occurred between the mid-1970s and the early 1980s because the victim was wearing shoes made during that time period. The Las Vegas Strip was notoriously dominated by mob-run casinos from the late 40s through the 80s. However, amateur investigators have been able to narrow down the victim to 3 men that disappeared around that time, making the finding even more chilling. The 3 men, all of whom had ties to the mob, vanished at the time, and their bodies were never found. However, the majority of the speculation was centered on George J. Vandermark, a gambling machine cheater who was trusted by the mob to oversee its slot machine operation at the Stardust Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. That is, until he betrayed them. Vandermark was hired by Lefty Rosenthal in 1974 to be in charge of the slot machines at the Stardust and the other 3 Argent-controlled casinos, but his real job description was to run their skimming operation. Vandermark allegedly facilitated the theft of $7 million to $15 million in slot machine coins. However, the Nevada Gaming Control Board became aware of the operation in 1976. Vandermark fled to Mazatlan, Mexico after Nevada gaming regulators subpoenaed him as a witness to the crime. He was said to have ended up in Costa Rica. Vandermark's situation worsened when the mob suspected him of only giving them $4 million from the skimming operation while keeping $3 million for himself. Jeff Vandermark, George J. Vandermark's son, who was working with the gaming board at the time, communicated with his father, who said he might be willing to return to testify. But George J. Vandermark was last seen at a Phoenix hotel in September 1976. He never made it to trial, and his body was never found. The following year, Jeff himself was murdered, but the police concluded it had nothing to do with his father's allegations. However, the body could also belong to William Crespo, a drug dealer who became a state witness after being caught smuggling cocaine. He was supposed to testify against a former insider from a mob-owned casino company, but he never appeared in court. Crespo was a former Puerto Rican who was apprehended by federal agents in Las Vegas in 1982 after flying in from Miami with $400,000 in cocaine. In the face of the evidence against him, Crespo agreed to be a federal informant and become a protected witness in return for testifying about the multi-million-dollar drug ring in which he was involved. The government of the United States paid $13,000 for his relocation and living expenses, and his testimony before a federal grand jury aided in the indictment of 10 defendants. Then Crespo, who was supposed to appear in court again, vanished in June 1983. With Crespo absent, the federal judge was forced to dismiss the charges against 7 defendants who had pleaded not guilty. However, perhaps the most likely candidate for whom the skeleton belongs to is Johnny Pappas, a Chicago native and veteran Las Vegas casino host. Pappas actually owned a boat on the lake. He found work in the casino industry at the Castaways Las Vegas Hilton and Caesars Palace. By the mid-1970s, Pappas was managing Lake Mead's Echo Bay Resort for the Argent Corporation. On the day he vanished, August 18, 1976, Pappas told his wife he was going to JoJo's restaurant at 1531 Las Vegas Boulevard South near downtown Las Vegas to meet someone interested in purchasing his boat. His car was discovered 4 days later in the parking lot of the Circus Casino on the Strip. Pappas's disappearance was investigated by police who confirmed his underworld connections, but no trace of him was ever found. Did the outfit fear that Pappas would reveal something about the unfolding details of skimming at the Argent casinos? If that's the case, then it's clear why they would have wanted him dead. They could have posed as buyers for his boat to lure him to his date near the lake, and they could have used his own boat to dispose of his body in a barrel. The drying Lake Mead, however, has yielded more human remains. A few months after the remains in the barrel were found, the National Park Service rangers were alerted that another set of human remains were discovered at Swim Beach. The investigation is still going on to determine the identification and cause of death. A firearm was recovered near the scene, but it was unclear whether it had anything to do with the body. Away from crimes, Lake Mead was regarded as one of America's most dangerous national parks, even before the water levels began dropping. Around 300 people have drowned in the reservoir since it was built in the 1930s. As such, according to Steve Schaefer, a local resident and the owner of the environmental services company Earth Resource Group, which is working to uncover the bodies, there will be many more discoveries. He said, "Most are just legitimately drowning victims, but I'm sure there are some nefarious ones out there, like the news is reporting and the body in the barrel. I'm sure there are going to be more." Another finding to have turned up in Lake Mead is a sunken World War II-era vessel. According to the National Park Service, it was a Higgins boat used for beach landings. The landing craft had been so far underwater that the Park Service began sending divers to the site in 2006. According to the Associated Press, the craft had been 185 feet below the surface for some time. The boat is now only half submerged and listing to one side as seen in photos. There are few details about how the vessel ended up in Lake Mead. Nobody knows whether it sank by accident or was purposely disposed of. However, the surplus nature of the craft highlights an earlier era of the lake when Las Vegas and Lake Mead were much more remote and removed from much of the United States, where relatively inexpensive World War II surplus could be pressed into service for new peaceful purposes in the park. And other speedboats and fishing boats that were once submerged are now baking in the desert sun. One speedboat was discovered vertically sticking out of the mud. Man Plus River, a YouTuber, investigated the remains of what appears to be a yacht or houseboat that sank decades ago. There is no definitive date for its sinking, but the items on board could have been dated between the 1970s and the 1990s. Kitchen utensils such as forks, knives, cappuccino cups, and saucers were found among the wreckage. A rusted fire extinguisher, motors, a yachting flag still attached to the pole, and a cassette tape were also discovered. It is relatively easy for boats to be sunk on Lake Mead. In an instant, Lake Mead can transform from pristine to white-cap waves. High waves can cause boats to tip and flood, causing them to sink. And what's more, changing water levels can bring difficult-to-see rocks and debris closer to the surface, also causing the vessels to sink. Lake Mead, however, has swallowed up more than human remains and boats. There is a complete World War II-era bomber aircraft resting at the bottom. The airplane crashed into Lake Mead in 1948. According to the official crash report, the pilots were flying low to collect one last bit of scientific data before returning to base, and their B-29 aircraft's instruments were incorrectly calibrated. According to the account, Lake Mead, which was as smooth as glass on that July morning in 1948, distorted their depth perception and sent the plane skipping across the water like a stone. However, there is another version of the crash. The pilots were allegedly trying to see how low they could fly over the surface of the lake when the bomber crashed. Everybody on board, however, managed to escape. 4 of the 5-man crew got out through the hatch, while the last man was pulled out of the water later with a broken arm. The whole crew was rescued by Park Service personnel, but the bomber has been resting on the bottom since then. The B-29 was an aircraft that pushed the limits of aviation design. It was twice the size of existing bombers, could carry twice the payload, travel twice the distance, and was 100 miles per hour faster than anything else on the ground at the time. It was also the first military plane with a pressurized cabin. Crews flying missions in B-17 and B-24 planes had to wear heavy winter gear and relied on oxygen at altitude. But pilots in the B-29 could fly in shirt sleeves, breathing cabin air like a passenger on a modern airliner. Another secret revealed by Lake Mead is much larger, a whole ghost town named St. Thomas. The area around St. Thomas, Nevada was once inhabited by Native Americans, but Mormon settlers would arrive in the area in 1865 and founded St. Thomas. However, when they discovered that they had not settled in Utah, they left St. Thomas, burning their homes and abandoning their crops. Around the 1880s, new settlers arrived and rebuilt the town, adding a hotel, post office, and school. The population peaked at around 500 people, but when the Hoover Dam project broke ground in 1931, residents of St. Thomas were told to relocate, making it the second time the town was abandoned. The government compensated them for their relocation, and the last residents left in 1938. St. Thomas was eventually swallowed by 60 feet of water. Due to fluctuating water levels, the ghost town resurfaced in 2002, and hikers can still walk around the ruins of St. Thomas to this day. There have been other finds in Lake Mead, and one is way older than the town of St. Thomas and has given scientists the opportunity to study 12-million-year-old volcanic ash. Researchers attached to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas's Cryptotephra Laboratory for Archaeological and Geological Research have grabbed the opportunity to study the surfaced sedimentary rock along Lake Mead's dwindling shoreline. The sedimentary rocks, which haven't been seen since the lake was created in the 1930s, contain ash from volcanoes in Idaho, California, and Wyoming. The ash most likely fell on this area of Nevada nearly 12 million years ago. The research team also published a study that suggests that while the closest active volcanoes are quite far away from Lake Mead, eruptions could reach the area in the future. Even a few inches of volcanic ash can have disastrous effects on power lines, communication systems, and roadways. In addition, ash is extremely hazardous to human health. The ash contains minute fragments that can cause lung tissue damage and respiratory illnesses such as silicosis. The team is now strongly advising cities such as Las Vegas to prepare for possible future eruptions that could cover the area in ash. Let's hear what you think of the chances of Lake Mead surviving in the comments section below.